morning. I'll call to order the regular meeting of our Zoning and Planning Committee. Today is March 3rd, 2016. I'm Lisa Bender. I chair the committee. We have Council Members Reich, Goodman, Council President Johnson, and Council Member Borsami. We are a quorum of the committee. We have 7 items on today's agenda. We will begin with the consent items before returning to the public hearing. And then we do have a couple of items on discussion. So the consent agenda begins at item number 3, which is approving the vacation of an alley for portions of Main Street Northeast and 30th Avenue North, and adopting the staff findings. Item number 4 has been requested to be continued 1 cycle, and that's a rezoning at 1701 44th Avenue North. And item number 5 is passage of an ordinance related to how we do our preservation regulations to simplify the required findings for a certificate of appropriateness. So I will move items 3 and 5. And Council President.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think there's a typo on number 3, which I do believe it should be 30th Avenue Northeast, Councilmember, right? Right.
Thank you. So we'll note that correction in the motion.
Chair Bender, I was just informed that the applicant on item number 4 is requesting that we continue that for 2 cycles.
2 seconds.
Thank you. The clerk just let me know that as well. So with that, I'll move items 3 and 5 for approval and move to continue item number 4 for 2 cycles, which I believe is April 7th. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. That brings us to item number 1, which is the Moxie Hotel at 1121 West Lake Street. We'll start with a staff presentation. This item also includes a rezoning, which is item number 7 under discussion. So we'll have the staff presentation about both of those items. I'll note that the public hearing for the rezoning was already concluded at Planning Commission. So the public hearing for today is really focused on the appeals, and staff will go through all of that. Ms. Helene is here.
Good morning, Chair Bender and committee members. The application before you is actually 2 appeals. So we have 1 appeal from a group of neighbors on the decision of the Planning Commission from their February 8th meeting. That appeal relates to a variance for floor area ratio, conditional use permit for height, yard variance on the rear yard, and a loading variance. And then we have another appeal from the applicant on the Planning Commission's decision to deny a front yard setback variance. So I'll just do those concurrently here. I'm also going to touch on the findings for the rezoning a little more briefly than I did at Planning Commission, but because that is one of the items before you today, we'll go through that as well. So the site is outlined here in the dark bold. It's at 1121 West Lake Street and 3005 Emerson Avenue South, so at the corner of Lake and Emerson. The site currently consists of a small commercial building at the corner. It's a 2-story building that has a restaurant and some residential and a large amount of surface parking. You can see here most of the site is dominated by surface parking right now. The site is proposed to be a hotel. It'd be a 6-story hotel with 123 guest rooms. That hotel would be 6 stories along Lake Street and then step down to 5 stories as you go south. They're proposing a limited amount of surface parking on site and then a drop-off zone for valet, and the majority of the parking would be provided through the valet service. The ground floor would include a restaurant and a lobby. Here's just a rendering of the building, so you can see 6 stories on Lake Street stepping down to 5. As far as the rezoning goes, the first finding that we're asked to look at for a rezoning application is consistency with the comprehensive plan. In this case, the property is on Lake Street, which is a commercial corridor as designated in the comprehensive plan. You can see here the orange line here is the commercial corridor designation. The reddish line is the outline of the activity center over at Lake and Hennepin. Outside the activity center, but that does not mean that it's inconsistent with the comprehensive plan here as far as C3A zoning. As you know, the C3A district is our community activity center district. So while that does match up with the land use designation in the comp plan for activity centers, that does not preclude C3A zoning from being located outside of an activity center. And in fact, we do have several instances of that throughout the city, some of which are recent.
Excuse me, Councilmember Goodman has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was involved in, as one of the people trying to make sure that the zoning had to be at least C3A in order to have a hotel. So prior to that change, because of an issue in my own ward, if that change had not been made not 2 months ago, would there be a rezoning required?
No. So there was a text amendment before the committee earlier this year that would have allowed hotels in the C2 district as of right. We changed it to 2 hotel categories. One, hotels less than 50 units, and 150 units or more, or sorry, 20 is the break. So as part of that, staff had recommended that hotels be allowed in C2, but the final language that was adopted by council did not include that. So the rezoning in this case is requested because of the hotel use.
Okay, thank you.
General policies for commercial corridors call for strong and successful commercial and mixed-use areas with a wide range of character and functions to serve the needs of current and future users, preserving the stability and diversity of the city's neighborhoods while allowing for increased density. Policies, again, for corridors call for a mix of uses with active uses on the ground floor and a height of at least 2 stories. The site is also in the study area of the Uptown Small Area Plan, which was adopted in 2008. Here's the current zoning map, which shows again that the site is C2. They're requesting C3A. We have C3A zoning immediately across the street and also along Lake Street where it's outside of the activity center. As far as the language in the Uptown Small Area Plan goes, this area is designated as the urban village, which you're seeing on your screen here in orange. So it's on the south side of Lake Street, which is the southern boundary of that urban village area. The language for well, I'll just touch here. This is also the future land use map in the small area plan, which designates the site as mixed use. Of course, mixed use is consistent with the C3A zoning designation. The small area plan prioritizes streets such as Lake Street as places for social interaction and urban activity. It recognizes that Uptown plays a role as a regional attraction in the local community. It talks about defining the edges of new growth and shaping the edges so that they transition to the neighborhood in a clear and predictable manner. In this case, the hotel is stepping down to 5 stories, and then there's a 17-foot setback between that 5th story and the south property line where it transitions to the neighborhood to the south. For the urban village, the preferred height is 3 to 5 stories with opportunities for taller buildings up to 84 feet on major corridors. And it calls for preferred mixed use and residential uses. As far as the built form, the plan calls for focusing growth in areas where it's most appropriate or where surface parking and underutilized land, large parcels, and market interest is abundant. Again, the site is currently completely dominated by surface parking. It's 2 city lots worth with a building footprint of about 800 square feet, and the balance is surface parking. The plan talks about encouraging mixed use on Lake Street to connect Uptown and Lyndale. This is certainly a location where it's between 2 activity centers on Lake Street and is really filling in a gap in the urban fabric between those 2 activity centers. Established through design and use strong gradual transitions between residential and commercial areas. Again, here the applicant is doing that with the building design by concentrating the bulk on Lake Street. Also, the plan in itself builds in a transition space on the south side of this property. So the properties along Lake Street in this area are designated for commercial or mixed use. The area to the south of the site, immediately south, is actually designated for medium density, meaning that that would transition in the future to some sort of transition space in and of itself where you'd see, perhaps townhome development or something larger than what's there now. And then the south half of the block is designated as low density residential.
Kimberly, could you talk, maybe now is a good time, about what other uses would be allowed on the site, given the plan and the zoning context?
So the difference between the C3A district and the C2 district is primarily that the C2 district allows for a lot of auto-oriented uses that would not otherwise be allowed in C3A. Also, the size of commercial uses allowed in C2 is much larger than what's allowed in C3A. So C3A allows more kind of small scale neighborhood size uses, but the C2 district allows for uses up to 20,000 square feet as of right, and also allows for a lot of auto-oriented uses like your fast food establishments, auto repair uses. Here we have the pedestrian-oriented overlay district, so those uses would not be allowed in this instance, but generally between C2 and C3A, that's one of the big differences. Also, in the C3A district, nightclubs are allowed, but again, in this instance, they're not because there's a spacing requirement from residential uses that couldn't be met here.
Would an apartment building be allowed in C2?
An apartment building would be allowed in C2, yes. The height minimums or the height maximums as of right in C2 and C3A are the same. So it's 4 stories, 56 feet as of right in each district, and then anything beyond that is a conditional use permit. I'll skip through some of this stuff here about the urban village, but basically it's asking for, again, high density mixed use on the south side of Lake Street, maintaining strong, successful commercial areas, talking about having active uses at the ground floor, and transitioning in height as it turns the corner, approaching the existing neighborhood, which again, this building does. Land use recommendations. So the Uptown Small Area Plan talks about a lot of things, but it doesn't make a lot of specific land use recommendations. So here are 3 that apply to the site: discouraging 1-story commercial buildings, encouraging retail on Lake Street and Lagoon, and encouraging mixed-use blocks along Lake Street with the goal of improving walkability and connectivity between Uptown and Lynn Lake. This here again is one more diagram out of the plan. So this is showing the land use intensity map, which is calling for urban-oriented development on the site. On the bottom half of the page here, you're seeing the frontage types called for an urban-oriented development. So the plan is looking for stoops, courtyards, parking that's screened from the street, patios or forecourts, and storefront type development. So this is a storefront development that has a little bit of space in front of it to allow for a forecourt. As far as building types, the plan is looking for, this is really tiny, live work units, small apartments, courtyard buildings, mixed use buildings, and loft style buildings. So the only thing that doesn't fit with that urban oriented development would be a building type that's parking podium with residential above or just straight parking. So the building type they're proposing here is consistent with that recommendation. So we also look at the surrounding uses on the site. I've touched on that a little bit. The area south of the site is primarily low density residential. There is an 18-unit apartment building on this block and a couple of duplexes. On the west side of Emerson Avenue, there is a townhome development and then a block-long 2-story commercial building. Other uses just generally as you go towards the activity center, so to the north and west of the site, we see a lot of high-density mixed-use buildings, including a couple of newly approved developments that have not started construction yet. And then as you go east, it's more smaller scale commercial uses until you get down to the Lynn Lake Activity Center. So here's another look at the building. Another one of the applications before you today is a conditional use permit for height. I've talked a little bit about what the plan says about height. Basically, on this site, it's calling for, I'll get to that one. It's calling for a couple of different things in the plan. So one area in the plan, it says that additional height is allowed on key corridors, which Lake Street would be a key corridor, up to 84 feet. This building is less than 84 feet in height. And then elsewhere in the plan, there shows a built form diagram that shows a 4-story building as being recommended on the site. So we acknowledge here that, of course, the applicant is proposing 6 stories, not 4, but there are other policies in the plan that do not necessarily preclude the 4-story building here. So they are calling for density, for activity, and for mixed use on this site. We're also looking at this, so it says, as in the activity center, buildings 3 to 5 stories can provide transitions, and taller buildings may be appropriate on major corridors. So they're stepping down to 5 again as you go to the neighborhood. I think that's most obvious as you look in the rendering here. So there's an angled roof line on Lake Street that angles down and then steps down a full story as you go to the south. And again, really the impact of height on adjacent neighborhoods and on adjacent uses is primarily dictated by the way the bulk is distributed. So in this case, the bulk is distributed along Lake Street. We also look at shadowing impacts. In this case, the neighbors, the low density residential uses to the south are not impacted at all by shadowing because they're on the south side of the site. There's also very limited shadowing impacts on other commercial uses on Lake Street. The shadow barely reaches the opposite side of Lake Street and barely touches that sidewalk. It only impacts it in the late afternoon in the fall and spring. So here's just another look at those shadow studies. The applicant is providing a transition again on the south side of the site. So there's a 17-foot setback between the building footprint and the adjacent residential use, which is actually zoned OR1. We can also get a little bit more into the character of surrounding uses. Just looking at what's been approved up and down Lake Street since the site was put into its current zoning district. This site has been zoned commercial since 1924. And that's when the first zoning code was adopted. So presumably commercial uses were located on the site before that. Since the plan was put into the C2, or the site was put into the C2 district, and since the Uptown Small Area Plan was adopted, we've seen a lot of new development on Lake Street as you go from Hennepin to the east. So we've seen the walkway project, we've seen the project at the Cheapo site, there's a project at Emerson and Lagoon. All of those projects are 5 or 6 stories, one is 7, and they all have floor area ratios that are very similar to the floor area ratio proposed as part of this project. So that brings me to the next application here, which is the floor area ratio variance. The applicant is requesting to increase the floor area ratio from 2.7 to 3.78. We're finding that practical difficulties exist due to policy recommendations for dense mixed-use development on the site, and that the site is uniquely situated on a commercial corridor and near an activity center. Also, the trend in the area has been for the recent trend in the area has been for similarly scaled development. So as we're looking at what's been approved, 1300 West Lake Street, which is the walkway project, was approved at a floor area ratio of 4.3. That was done in the last few years, and that is located outside of the activity center. The walkway is 3.67. 1300 West Lake Street is the Cheapo site. That was approved at 4.3 earlier this year outside of the activity center. There's a project at Lagoon and Emerson, which is approved at 3.77. That building is built, and that again is very close to what the applicant is requesting here, which is 3.78. The maximum achievable floor area ratio in the C3A district, if this property qualified for bonuses, is 3.78, which matches what they're asking for. In this case, because a hotel is considered a commercial use, it doesn't qualify for any bonuses. But, you know, similarly, the look of the building would be similar to if a residential development were to go in here and qualified for bonuses. The same thing could be achieved as of right at 3.78. The proposed FAR is in keeping with the spirit and intent of the ordinance and the comprehensive plan. The small area plan does not specifically reference building bulk, but calls for dense mixed-use development on the south side of Lake Street in the urban village. And again, the bulk is distributed on Lake Street to allow adequate access to light and air for adjacent properties. We have 2 yard variances. This froze on me. So the first yard variance, I'll stick with the original appeal from the neighbors, is for the rear yard, and that's along the alley. A variance to the rear yard from 15 feet to 0 is what's requested here. The 15-foot setback is only required because the applicant is putting windows on that side of the building. If there were not windows on that side of the building, it could be built up to the property line. So again, staff is finding that practical difficulties exist in complying with the ordinance for 2 reasons. One being that we want windows here. This isn't a pedestrian-oriented overlay district. Removing windows from that side of the building would diminish both the appearance of the building, but also SEPTED policies that call for additional eyes on the street and more visibility from the hotel onto the adjacent uses. Also, the setback requirement as it relates to windows is intended to somewhat reflect the building code requirements. So again, if there were no windows, it could be built up to the property line. The amount of openings proposed on that elevation are consistent and allowed by building code. There's an alley between the building and the adjacent use, which is another single-story commercial building. It's freezing on me. So that alley separation between this building and the building to the east allow for adequate separation between the uses. They allow for adequate access of light and air. The applicant is proposing to step the building back at the corner to allow a sight triangle as you're coming out of the alley to reduce any potential vehicle conflicts between vehicle traffic and pedestrian traffic on Lake Street. Staff did recommend denial of a variance to the front yard setback. That denial was upheld by the Planning Commission, so that's the concurrent appeal that we have today. The variance to the front yard setback is for a small portion of the building. So because the site to the south is zoned OR1, there's a setback requirement for the south 25 feet of the lot. So in that south 25 feet, the applicant is required to maintain a setback of 15 feet. So that setback is maintained for the south 20 feet of the lot, but there's a 5-foot portion of the building that encroaches into the required front yard. Staff did not find practical difficulties in complying with that regulation in the zoning code. There's a pretty consistent established pattern of setbacks along this side of Emerson. And also it would be a fairly minor adjustment in the building to bring that portion back and meet that 15-foot setback requirement. The final application that went to the Planning Commission was for, oh wait, we have a loading variance, sorry. That has also been appealed. So as far as the loading variance, staff found that practical difficulties exist. A loading will actually be accommodated on site without an official loading space. So the applicant has provided a narrative and some information in their travel demand management plan that shows laundry will be done on site to cut back on the number of deliveries for that use. Deliveries that come into the backside of the site will be accommodated via smaller vehicles that can fit on site, and anything larger would be accommodated on Lake Street, and they're working with Public Works on that. We also had a site plan review application that was not appealed. So that one is not before you. I will close there and can answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for staff? Okay, there are none. So we will open the public hearing. We'll begin with, why don't we begin with the applicant? Then we'll have the other appellant. There are two appeals, so it gets a little confusing, but we'll start with the applicant, then we'll have the folks who appealed, and then we'll open it up for everyone else to have 2 minutes each. And then we'll ask all of our speakers to please sign in with the clerk, and please state your name and address for the record before you speak.
I'm Benjamin Graves with Graves Hospitality. My father and I have been working on trying to do a hotel in Uptown for at least 8 years now. We were originally working with Stu Ackerberg on the original Mosaic project that got stalled out because of the economy and things like that. But we live near the neighborhood. Jim's moving into the neighborhood, and we've always wanted to do a hotel. We've had a lot of outreach on that. We're very excited about this site and about this opportunity, and thank you for your time today. I'll keep it very brief. You guys can ask whatever questions you like, but I did want to bring up the side yard setback and explain some of our reasonings for why we would still propose that we are able to build that sliver piece of the building. I do have up on the screen. You can see the white checked area. It's 5 feet by 7 feet. That's the area that we're encroaching on that side yard setback. That puts the reason that we are even talking about this side yard setback or the need for this setback is due to the process that we went through with not because of the city's request, but because of the neighborhood's requests. We did meet many meetings with neighbors, individual, one-on-one, at neighborhood at neighborhood board, neighborhood association meetings, and because of that, we want to really be proud of what we're doing here. We want the neighborhood to be proud and embrace this project that's going to be an asset for Uptown. And the neighborhood really didn't like the height, and they wanted us to step the building down. And so we ended up redesigning the building as a U shape. And one of the other reasons that we changed to the U shape was to face the windows into the courtyard and not facing the neighbors, because some of the neighbors didn't want us overlooking their backyards. Understandable. We were able to come up with a design that we think was very appropriate, but due to that design, to meet the requirements of how the stairwells work and the building and everything, we're encroaching 5 feet by 7 feet on that setback. We could take that portion of the building and push it to the backside. We do have more room behind there, but that would be encroaching in the neighborhood further. And we don't really want to do that. And we feel that this is a very appropriate design, and that there is a bit of a hardship due to the trying to work with everyone on getting something that we're all proud of.
Just so we can understand, could you just walk through the picture and point to the area that's, you have it marked, but just so that we can all see.
Yeah, let me grab a pen
clearly
here.
what
So the outline of the building is right here. Oops, this dash line right here. It's like a U, and this little portion right here, which is 5 feet by 7 feet, is where we're encroaching. If you looked at the adjacent property, their building is actually much encroaching into the neighborhood further at the property line. We did go out and take a measurement of that to confirm that. And so we think it's very much in fitting with the commercial building that is next door to us. But in addition, we could take that as of right, or not, I don't know if it's as of right, but within the setback requirements, we could build in this blue section here, which we're not. We're pulling the building back further, and this is the area that we're requesting a variance on that side yard setback. So it's 5 feet by 7 feet, and what that does is it would alleviate this kind of weird niche in the building from an aesthetic perspective to the neighborhood. And then our windows, of course, for the guest rooms face out this way and this way. So we're not. We do have windows on the side of the building, but they're at a higher area. They're not viewing windows. And so we worked with the neighborhood to make sure that we didn't have people looking down into people's backyards.
Okay. Any questions?
And that's all I have.
Thank you. Can you remind us the height of the original proposal?
We were originally proposing a 9-story building. I don't remember the actual height of it, but it was 84 feet.
Okay. Thank you. And what's this height?
This height is
56.
72.5 at the peak, and then it steps down.
Thank you. Okay. There are no questions for the applicant, so we will move. Mr. Qualley, would you like to present first, or we could also open the hearing either way?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Tom Johnson with the Gray Plant Moody Law Firm, and I'm representing the appellants. I came prepared today to speak about the rezoning and why that rezoning is inconsistent with the Uptown Small Area Plan, inconsistent contrary to the Minneapolis Plan and the criteria under the ordinance for granting a rezoning. That's intertwined with why the conditional use permit should be denied. And I would like to get into that. But let me tell you first what we learned yesterday, which is that the parking, which staff indicated is going to be provided primarily through valet services, was apparently to be accommodated in the Calhoun Square ramp. Well, I learned yesterday from the owner of that ramp that there isn't any space available in the Calhoun Square ramp. And so that can't be accommodated. There have been, I learned from the owner, who also owns the Mosaic building, that there's been some discussion about parking at Mosaic. But there is no signed agreement. The owner doesn't know whether there's even space available in terms of the number of spaces that would be needed to be provided to meet the minimum ordinance requirement on a 24/7 basis. And that wasn't analyzed in the staff report. That they look at the Calhoun Square ramp, and is that within 800 feet, and does that meet all the other ordinance requirements, et cetera. That's a big deal. There is no parking currently provided for this hotel. And it seems to me that should stop the committee and council in its tracks and say, well, wait a second. We can't move forward with the rezoning. We can't move forward with approving all these variances until we know that you have parking available. That should be step number one in this analysis here.
So as I stated earlier, as we opened this item, we did have the public hearing for the rezoning at the Planning Commission. Right. To your point, so this is a quasi-judicial proceeding related to the appeals. To your point, the rezoning is part of the whole package. So as the chair, I will allow some comments about the rezoning, but I just want to state the legal context, which is that public hearing has been opened and closed at Planning Commission.
Okay. Appreciate that.
And that is also for the folks who came to speak. I know people will likely speak about the rezoning, but again, the focus of today is on the appeals for the conditional use permit and the variances.
Well, I think at the heart of this matter is whether the small area plan and therefore the comprehensive plan accommodate a hotel at this site. And when you look to see whether there's an accommodation, you don't look at the general policy and platitudes within the Minneapolis plan. That there's policies there that will support just about anything. And there's some broad language even in the small area plan. What you do look at is the specific language. And since this site is not in the activity center where hotels are allowed, this is not a question about whether you could have a hotel in Uptown. Hotels are permitted in the activity center. They wouldn't be here for any reason if they were in the activity center. They'd be going for a building permit, not for a zoning change, a conditional use permit, and 4 variances, which says a lot about the size of the site in relationship to what's being built. So when you look at the small area plan and what it says, there clearly was intended to be a breakpoint at Lake Street. North of Lake Street, high intensity development. This is outside of the activity center I'm talking about now. This is in the what's called the urban village area, south sub area. Lake Street, south of that, that was where the transition was going to occur into the residential neighborhood. And if you take a look, there's references to that fact throughout the small area plan. And I'll just read you one. This is page 56. Restaurants are permitted in the urban village, south sub area. That's where the proposed hotel site is located. But other evening uses, such as nightclubs and hotels, should be located in the activity center. Now, you can't be much more specific than that. The activity center says that's where hotels are located. And then it says south of Lake Street, there shouldn't be any hotels of this size. So hard for me to imagine how you could be in more conflict with the small area plan when you have language like that that says hotels outside of the activity center, south of Lake Street. No, that's not where they're intended to be. Now, these provisions in the small area plan, of course, got brought into the Minneapolis plan, your comprehensive plan, when you adopted the small area plan. That's what happened. So these provisions are by adoption also part of the comp plan. But perhaps more significantly than that, the comp plan itself has a future land use map for the southwest sector. And that draws some borders, boundaries for the activity center around the intersection of Hennepin Lake. Proposed site is outside of those borders. Then that was in 2010 or 2010 when you adopted the zoning changes. You create this activity center that allows large hotels within it. We're not within the activity center. So right there in the comprehensive plan, you show this site outside of the activity center. Now, staff said, well, we've done that before. We've built some buildings on Lake Street that are outside of the activity center that needed a C3A zoning. When I heard that, it reminded me of what my mother used to say to me moons ago when I would say, well, Mom, I did that before. And she would say, Tom, I didn't know about it then. You shouldn't have done it then either. But here, so you shouldn't have done it. But here, there's a difference even beyond that, which is that those uses were north of Lake Street, and they were for uses that were permitted within a mixed-use area. They weren't a large hotel, which is only permitted within the C3A zoning district. So that doesn't carry any muster. They're different. You go back to what the small area plan says about south of Lake Street. No. Now the fact that it's inconsistent with the comp plan is important. There is a state statute that says when you have a comprehensive plan and you cannot enact an official control, as a new zoning district or new zoning property, if it is inconsistent with that comp plan. State law prohibits it. And that sets up a way in the process for amending the comp plan. You got to amend the comp plan first before you can rezone here. I think that's real straightforward interpretation of state law. Now,
Councilmember Goodman has a question.
Mr. Johnson, I'm just wondering what your interpretation is of the point I made earlier, that while these applicants were in the process, a hotel was allowed in the C2. So we then made a change, not targeted at them, to only first allow these kinds of hotels in C3. So wouldn't they basically have a right and be able to come back to the city and say, you changed the process on us midstream? We've been working on this for a year. You make this change 8 months into our process or maybe more. Don't you think they could come back right back at us on that zoning change and suggest that we interfered or tortiously interfered with their ability to get their project done?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Goodman, they have a right to build a hotel in a C2 zone. They do have. It just has to be 20 rooms or less. That's the law now, and I think it was the law back before the change. If that's different, if they could have built the larger hotel, you're saying they could have built a 123-story hotel in that? I don't think so, but we can go back and trace that ordinance. I mean, there's a hotel can be built on this site, but it's a smaller hotel. It's 20 units or less. Would that fit? Probably so. But that's not what the developer wants to do. We're here because the developer wants to build a large hotel on a small site. I'm going to skip over the ways in which the proposal fails the tests for under the rezoning criteria. One of them, of course, is that it has to be consistent with the comp plan. I've already covered that. It's not. And not only is that in violation of the criteria, it's in violation of the state law if you were to move forward without having first amended the comp plan. So with respect to the appeal on the CUP, and I'm only going to speak to the appeals on the conditional use permit and on the floor area ratio variance, because both of those speak to the development project, the project that's here being too large for this site, too large, too wrong in terms of use. The conditional use permit, again, when you look at what the criteria are, the first criteria is that it has to be consistent with the comp plan. It's not, for the reasons that I've talked about. And again, what is critical here is that the transition that's envisioned under the small area plan starts on the south side of Lake Street. Starts on the south side of Lake Street. North of Lake Street, that's where the taller buildings are supposed to be. The building envelope, the plan speaks of, are, when you look at those pictures, that's where the taller buildings are, not south of Lake Street. And this CUP, if it's granted, because they want to build a bigger hotel, that's fine, but just build it in the right spot in Uptown, and there's not an issue here. But to approve a conditional use permit to go from 4 floors to 6 floors after you've already been asked to increase what they can build by way of number of rooms by changing the zoning, I mean, that again speaks so loudly to the fact that this is too large of a project for this site. And again, the variance request for the floor area ratio goes to that very fact as well. Under the current zoning, the C2 zoning, I think it's the floor area ratio there is limited to 1.7. That's the top, 1.7. If you were to grant the rezoning, which the reasons I've just said you shouldn't, they would be allowed to go to 2.7. But they're asking to go to 3.78. So, way over twice as much as what's currently allowed, significantly more than what would be allowed even if it were rezoned to allow the higher intensity use. This is just too much for the site. And that's the whole issue. That's why it's in conflict with the comp plan, et cetera, et cetera. I'll take questions now if you have, but let me just conclude by saying, going back to the parking issue, that should be a showstopper until there is parking. Why go forward? Why go forward with this, one? And then two, you have to amend the comp plan if you're going to go forward with this project. Now, will the neighbors say, if you're going to do that, let's go back and look at that small area plan first, because if you think that what was the vision for the south side of Lake Street should no longer be the vision, you want higher intensity use, you want hotels. There's 3 uses that are allowed under the C3A that aren't allowed under C2. One are larger hotels, 20 rooms or more. 2, nightclubs, and 3, regional sports arenas. So that's the lump sum of it. But if you want to think about having Lake Street and the south side specifically open for those uses, then bring it back to the neighborhoods, let them start the small area planning process again. They invested thousands of hours last time, ask them to do it again. But if you say, no, we're going to go forward with this plan, even though this isn't what you wanted, and this is specifically what you said you didn't want, then I think you've really undermined the integrity of that whole process. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have many people signed in. We will ask each person to stay within the 2 minutes. My vice chair is homesick, so I will manage the time as well. We do have people signed in an order, but Mr. Qualley, if you'd like to speak first, that's fine with me.
Madam Chair, Council Member, President, thank you very much. I am Philip Qualley. I would like to respectfully protest the 2-minute time limit as being too brief and arbitrarily set. And I would like to note that one of the council committee members is not here. I am Philip Qualley. My wife Paul and I live at 3021 Emerson, and I speak today as a private resident. I respectfully request the City of Minneapolis to oppose this rezoning and all land use variance applications related to the proposal. Please be reminded the Calhoun Area Residents Action Group Neighborhood Board voted against supporting this current project by a margin of 41-10. I ask the committee to give deference to those residents who live immediately near the area. This will impact our homes. I oppose the proposed project due to the applicant's request for a rezoning is not consistent with the Uptown Small Area Plan. Referencing state statute 525280 regarding additional findings to be made before rezoning is approved, please reference the statute number 4, which whether there is a reasonable uses of the property in question permitted under existing zoning classifications going on. The CPED staff report itself states the existing C2 zoning of the property allows for reasonable use of the property. Allowable uses include mixed use commercial, residential, and professional services, and that is what we have now with Emerson Row, a very successful building on the south side. The only problem at this site is the proposal itself, which increases density by over 100%. Returning to statute reference to be made, rezoning is approved. Item 5, whether there has been a change in the character or trend of development in the general area of the property in question, and goes on from there. Point of fact, please, let us be clear. There has been no development, no change to increase the height of a building on the south side of Lake Street from Lake Calhoun at Knox Avenue east to Interstate 35W, including the areas of the Uptown Inland Lake Small Area Plans. City staff cites an example to justify building height as a change within the location of 1300 West Lake Street. This is comparable is not relevant. It is on the north side of Lake Street near the activity center where the USAP identifies more intense development. Using the 1300 Lake Street building as a comparable is no justification for expanding the activity center 2 blocks to the east in a non-contiguous manner and jumping across Lake Street to the south side. Again, in the local area, east from Fremont Avenue, there has been on the south side of Lake Street, there has been no change in the building heights. We have new buildings that are a story and a half that service the neighborhood. And across Lake Street, even from this site, there is Arby's and there are still single-story buildings. I wish to speak to the intentions of the USAP to create transitions from the height density areas and residential areas. Let me be clear, the transition area is at Lake Street. It includes the width of Lake Street and the first two lots, not at mid-block of the residential neighborhood where the applicants now propose. To assert a 6-story hotel next to a 2-story home is not going to damage our home's livabilities. Our right to enjoy privacy and financial values is not credible. A 6-story building on the south side of Lake Street will have dramatically increased impact that is, in the end, and is detrimental to our single-family homes. I would just like to close and say, in some, the proposed rezoning of this property is inconsistent with the small area plan and meets none of the criteria. And I wish to speak just very quickly to the variance for the rear yard and alley lines loading dock variances. And there is an unreasonable safety threat to the general public. A zero setback would create a dangerous situation for cars entering the alley from the hotel at a blind 90-degree intersection, in particular for walking pedestrians, due to the cars exiting the alley onto Lake Street. Even with the minor corner cut out of the development as designed, there will be virtually no way for a car pulling onto Lake Street to see if the pedestrians are approaching, or vice versa. The traffic pattern also relies on a one-way commercial traffic operation into a two-way alley. Cars on Lake Street turning into the alley southward will face a head-on with hotel cars with no way to back up safely because of the blind wall. The other piece here, we're very concerned with no hotel curb cuts that direct cars to turn left out of the hotel, so our alleys may become thoroughfares for speeding valet drivers. We are also concerned as to any delay entering traffic at the hotel and the real potential waiting cars will back up onto Emerson at the Lake Street intersection. The variance for no loading dock therefore means commercial delivery and garbage trucks working at curb and blocking alley potential. These unanswered factors lead to the reality that the proposed project is too big, far too high in intensity, with danger to the general public for the area you are trying to develop. I ask you to reject the rezoning and all variance applications in their entirety. Please uphold the small area plan and the Minneapolis comprehensive plans. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Qualley. I'll just note that as the appellant, we did allow Mr. Qualley to speak as long as he would like, but now we would like each person who's part of the public hearing to please stick within the 2 minutes. This is a quasi-judicial public hearing on the appeals that are noted in the agenda. We'd like each person to please state your name and address for the record before you speak. Please try to keep your remarks relevant to the appeals, and please try not to repeat too much of what someone else has said. So with that, we will begin with Sarah Lynn Romanishin. And then after that, we have Clark Olson, Joan Marks, and Aaron Rubenstein.
My name is Sarah Lynn Romanishin, and I am a resident of Lowry Hill East. I am here today to speak on several issues and ask that you consider the following. 1, support the appeal submitted by Philip Qualley and vote against the CUP and all variances for the Moxie Uptown Hotel. 2, vote against. Is anyone listening to me? Okay. All right. Second, vote against the appeal submitted by Ben Graves of Graves Hospitality regarding the front yard setback variance. 3, do not approve the Linden Hills rezoning study and do not adopt the finding that obtaining consent signatures for the rezoning of properties from residential to commercial in the Linden Hills rezoning study would be impractical. 4, listen to the residents of Uptown, Linden Hills, and all of our Minneapolis neighborhoods. Follow the small area plans and zone to our specifications, not yours. 5, stop the tear downs and destruction of our neighborhoods. It is March 2016. Elections are less than 2 years away. CPED and City Hall shenanigans are now public for everyone to see. Notifying residents is not practical, shenanigans. Ignoring community wants and needs, shenanigans. 4 stories does not equal 6, shenanigans. Fudging the meaning of small area plans, shenanigans. CPED and City Hall have become synonymous with shenanigans. Enough damage has been done. Neighborhood voices must come first. It is time to back away from the shenanigans, stop playing games, prove that you can care, and stand with us, your constituents, not against us. Thank you.
Thank you. We've worked out the technical difficulties now. So we have Mr. Olson, please, and then Joan Marks, Aaron Rubenstein.
Good morning. My name is Clark Olson. I live on 3029 Emerson Avenue South with my wife and 2 small children. Our house is within 300 feet of the proposed Marriott Moxie Hotel. As you all know, these rezoning decisions are significant. They stay with the property over time. And myself, my neighbors, we've all made significant investments in our homes, purchasing and maintaining under the assumption that the city would honor the Uptown Small Area Plan. As has been mentioned, the proposed location of this hotel is clearly outside of the boundaries of the activity center that is well defined within the Uptown Small Area Plan. And there's absolutely no precedent for expanding the activity center to the south side of Lake Street on Emerson Avenue. The projects that were referenced, they're all on the north side of Lake Street. If you want to look for comparable development in this area on the south side, I suggest you drive by the site. Look a block away. There's a 1-story mattress firm building going in, literally a block away from this location. So consider this proposal today and ask yourself, is this good planning? Is this good city planning? These are big decisions to me and my neighbors. Comment has been made before that circumstances have changed since 2008 when the original Uptown Small Area Plan was adopted. If that's the case, please, I ask, undertake a process to revisit the plan and look at it holistically. Don't make an ad hoc decision on this one tiny site that you can see on the map here that is going to have a significant impact on the livability and the safety of the area and the neighborhood that I live on and that I'm raising my kids on. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Sorry. Joan Marks. Then we have Mr. Rubenstein, Kathleen Boku.
Good morning. I'm Joan Marks. I live at 3020 Emerson. And I'm in agreement with the people who've spoken before me. And I wanted to just reiterate and call to attention some of the zoning, the city zoning code, section 520.30. The purposes in this project that has been proposed, it's in direct violation of 5 of the 10 underlying purposes of the city zoning code. The first one is to implement the policies of the comprehensive plan. Number 2, to promote and protect the public health, safety, aesthetics, economic viability, and general welfare of the city. 3, to encourage the most appropriate use of land throughout the city. 4, to protect the character and stability of residential, commercial, and industrial areas within the city, and to promote the orderly and beneficial development of those areas. And number 5, to prevent the overcrowding of land and the undue concentration of the population. The proposed project fails to meet these purposes. It's in direct conflict with the USAP and is contrary to the general welfare. And for this reason, it is undermining the balance, buffering, and transition between the commercial and residential uses of the south side of Lake Street in this area. It would be an inappropriate use of land, too large a building, and it's indirective. It's with the policy that calls for this kind of building in the activity center. There have been a lot of comments on Facebook and some of the other social media, and I wanted to read one comment from an East Calhoun resident. He wrote on Facebook recently about the proposed hotel. We want vibrant commercial districts and livable neighborhoods. With good planning, we can have both. Please say no to this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rubenstein.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Aaron Rubenstein, 3249 Emerson Avenue South. Before I begin my intended remarks, I just want to one point of information. I believe the area in question here is not 5 by 7 feet. I believe it's 5 by 15 feet. So I'd like to speak to the history and significance of the Uptown Small Area Plan as it relates to all of the zoning approvals, including those that are under appeal because they all require conformance to the comprehensive plan, and the Uptown Small Area Plan, or USAP, is a part of that comp plan. The Uptown Small Area Plan resulted from a number of intense development skirmishes around Uptown. Mayor Ryback found the funds for the USAP plan because of these divisive skirmishes and the importance of Uptown to the city as a whole. I was one of 20 members of the USAP steering committee, and many Carrick and Uptown residents were very involved in the planning process. Following adoption of USAP by the City Council in February of 2008, zoning in the broader area was evaluated and adjusted in the Midtown Greenway rezoning study adopted by the City Council in April 2010. Much of the urban village area north of Lake Street was rezoned at that time from C2 to C3A. It was clearly a purposeful decision to leave the existing C2 zoned areas between the Hennepin Lake and Lynn Lake activity centers as C2. USAP is a carefully crafted document that manages to balance numerous and competing interests very successfully in prescribing how and where Uptown should grow. It aims to promote orderly and predictable development, accommodate sustainable growth, and protect and enhance surrounding residential neighborhoods by, in part, concentrating height, density, and high-intensity uses in the core, that is, in the activity center and in that portion of the urban village between Lake Street, north of Lake Street, and the Midtown Greenway. All of these things are important for a strong and healthy Uptown that accommodates growth and has both commercial and residential areas that are vibrant and sustainable. It's about balance. The plan states, this plan proposes specific patterns of new growth that can achieve the goals of providing development capacity while simultaneously stabilizing the neighborhoods and improving open spaces and streets. Among USAP's stated goals are to support and direct growth in a sustainable manner by reinforcing surrounding neighborhoods, strengthening neighborhood edges, limiting commercial encroachment, and establishing high-quality transition areas. USAP is a great and important roadmap for Uptown, intended to be a 15 to 20-year plan. It's also a peace treaty. Many Uptown residents view it as a contract of sorts with the city, a shared vision for planning and development that was formally adopted as city policy as part of the comprehensive plan.
If you could wrap up, your time is over.
Certainly. I believe USAP takes precedence over the general comp plan policies because it's tailored specifically to this area. And lastly, I just urge you to respect and uphold the plan and deny approval of the hotel at this location. This type of project is precisely what the plan was meant to disallow. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. And I'd like to just distribute copies of the development intensity map in my comments.
Sure, thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
And I just want to note, Mr. Rubenstein did send us a lengthy email that had a lot of really good information in it, and I'm sure it was read. It was read by me and others. I just want to make sure you knew that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Kathleen. And then we have Julie Vessel.
Hello, everyone. I respectfully request that the City Council deny all variances and any kind of decisions related to this hotel. I'm a resident at 3309 DuPont Avenue South. I have 4 reasons why I request this. First, it does encroach upon the neighborhood and its livability for the reasons that have been already outlined so well by the people before me. Secondly, it abridges the rights of the 500 plus people who put this small area plan together, worked hard to balance all the interests, and the even larger number of residents like myself who trust that once this plan is in place, that our government will support it, city government, and that we have something that protects our neighborhoods and enhances its livability. It abridges those rights. This project also penalizes people who respect the small area plan and rewards those who don't. For example, I was at the Carrick meeting when the mattress firm person, business owner, said, I had no idea I could go and appeal all this and do something much bigger. If I did, I would have done it myself. So what message do we send when the people who respect the small area plan and fit within that lose out, in effect, to the people who are more well-financed with larger projects and come in and can carry through major changes to a plan like this? Lastly, this hearing, these decisions are not about this project. This is about a sea change for the small area plan. As the city staff person mentioned, decisions like this are used as precedents for other projects. So we're not just talking about one project here on the south side. We're talking about other projects by well-financed people, not necessarily from the neighborhood, coming in and making changes. So I think we should be able to make change. Let's do it through the small area process. Do not be paid the trust of all the people who worked on that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Vessel?
Good morning and thank you. I'm Julie Bessel. I'm representing Mono, which is a business at 1350 Lagoon. We are proud to call Uptown our home for over a decade. Proud to be in that community, fueling what we can into the support of the surrounding businesses and community. And I want to express my support for this development and reinstate the commercial benefits for a company like ours, where 90% of our clients are out of state and travel here often to conduct business. And we are without an Uptown option in terms of their convenience. And as you may or may not know, business travel convenience is everything. So our options are downtown or Bloomington. And the need for an Uptown hotel would be a great benefit to our business, as well as recruiting, where we are totally attracting talent from all across the country. And again, to invite them into where our business is proudly planted and give them that opportunity to stay conveniently in proximity of our business would be a huge advantage. So I just wanted today reinforce the commercial needs for this, as well as everything you're considering. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we have Paul Perner, Ashtok, then Sally Abner. I'm saying everyone's names terribly, but you'll get the idea.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. My name is Paul Perner, and I live at 3229 Holmes Avenue South in Uptown. I've spent 40 of my 45 years living in or around Uptown. And when the neighborhood started to gentrify with Callan Square and the Uptown Bar became the Apple Store, and then we saw Victoria's Secret move in, it lost its heart and its soul. And for a lot of us, we were gnashing our teeth about the loss of local identity and local ownership. And so the fact that we all agree that we need a hotel in Uptown, and this is a great opportunity for us on this location because now we have a local developer who lives in the neighborhood. All of this money is going to stay in the neighborhood, and if it goes to the grandkids, it's going to the other side of Lake of the Isles. It's not going anywhere else. They take care of the projects that they work on. Their projects end up on lists like Condé Nast Top 10 hotels, restaurants in the nation and the world. Minneapolis-St. Paul magazine cited their restaurant in their hotel downtown as one of the starting points of turning Minneapolis into, excuse me, the culinary town that it is right now. I want that in my neighborhood. I want that in my city. That's why I'm here today. This is an opportunity to partner with a local entity who will keep this local. This is my neighborhood. This is where my children are growing up. This is where my children are going to grow up. My family is intertwined with this neighborhood and has been and continues on being that. And we would really like this kind of development in our neighborhood. And again, I appreciate your time. Thank you to my neighbors for taking such great care of the neighborhood with me. Thank you for the Graves and everybody else who's here to speak out. This is very important, but I ask that you please consider everyone's viewpoints. Thank you.
Thank you. Ashtok Dorovo, and then Sally Ableitner, Troy Wenk.
Good morning. My name is Ashok Darwell at 4548 Vincent Avenue South. I'm a local business owner, and I have watched the Graves Hospitality projects over many years, as the previous person had just said. They've done great work in the city. They're local. But as a business owner, I have been looking for an Uptown location for over a year, and honestly feel that there's a division between where the DuPont and sort of Emerson area is between Lindale, and I really believe this project will be a great Band-Aid to connect Hennepin and Lindale from a business perspective. And I think it's going to add a lot of value to all the area residents as well as the businesses. If you look around there, I mean, Arby's and things like that, those are things that need to, there's a need for increased development in that area from a commercial perspective. And so I'm here to support the Graves and request that their wishes are granted. So thank you.
Thank you. Sally?
Good morning. My name is Sally Eblinkner. I am a resident at 3636 Grand Avenue South. I've been a resident of the Uptown neighborhood for the past 20 years. 8 of those years was a rental and Emerson. I am here in support of the hotel for the following reasons. It will be a place for my friends and family to stay near me specifically. It will provide a small eatery for the neighborhood and again for our use. It will provide additional employment opportunities for those in the neighborhood and surrounding. And it will also make the neighborhood more viable for new businesses. And as seen on my specific block on Grand Avenue, it has also increased my property value. Most importantly to me, as a single woman, it activates the sidewalk and eliminates an empty lot. Therefore, there will be more people on that street, on that sidewalk, and increasing the safety value of our neighborhood. Again, I'm in support of this proposal, and I hope that you take this into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Troy? Then Rudyard Dyer, Claudette, and Alex.
Good morning. My name is Troy Lenk. I own the building at 1620 Westlake, a commercial building 6 blocks west of the site. I have about 30 employees in the building, and I've got a tenant who also has about 30 employees in the building. We support the project. I spoke earlier about Uptown having many things, shopping, entertainment, restaurant, office, retail services, and no hotel. It seems like everybody wants a hotel in Uptown. But I'm aware of 3 other hotels that have been proposed in Uptown over the last 5 or 8 years. None of them happened. All of those very local neighbors opposed them, but I don't think any of those local neighbors are here today to oppose this hotel. And I'm guessing that these neighbors here today opposing this hotel didn't oppose those other 3 on Holmes and Calhoun. I'd like to speak briefly about the notch. If you approve this project, I'd encourage you to allow the variance for the side yard setback to allow the notch. I think the last thing Uptown needs is a building that has a notch out of it, an awkward notch that's kind of contrived. And I think if you're going to approve the project overall, the project is best massed on the street as initially proposed by the developer. I'll echo the comments by Mono about needing the hotel rooms for our clients. And I'll echo the comments about the Graves being a stand-up organization who's willing to invest millions of dollars in our neighborhood, my neighborhood, to improve the urban fabric, increase the breadth of services in Uptown, and improve the tax basis for Minneapolis. Please support the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dyer? And Claudette and Alex. If there's anyone who hasn't signed in who'd like to speak, could you sign in with the clerk? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rudyard Dyer. I'm a resident of Uptown. I live at 2436 Irving Avenue South. I'm here to voice my support for the hotel. I do have a lot of friends and family that do come to visit in Uptown, and it's just difficult to give them the full Uptown experience, whether that be going around the lakes or food or nightlife or something like that, if they have to constantly be traveling back and forth between downtown or the suburbs of Bloomington or St. Louis Park or something. It's tough to say things that haven't already been said before me, but I would like to reiterate that I think that having Ben and Jim as developers, keeping it local, someone who knows the area, and especially a new concept like the Moxie hotels, where I believe there's only one other one in the entire world, would be fantastic and would be really great for the Uptown area. Thank you.
Thank you. Claudette?
Hello, I'm Claudette Guillermo, and I live on 1426 West 31st Street. And I moved to Uptown, moved to Minneapolis over 3 years ago. I very much enjoy the neighborhood. It suits my lifestyle, and I would personally love to see a hotel in the area. I have very many friends who love to visit the great city of Minneapolis, and I feel that this appears to be a very, very carefully developed project and fits with the continuing changes in Uptown and provides economic development. So I very much support this project by Graves Hospitality, and I hope that you will support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
Morning, Madam Chair, council members. My name is Alex Cicchini. I live at 3525 Fremont Avenue South with my wife and son. I'm here today in support of the hotel, urging you to deny the appeals before you for the hotel at Lake and Emerson. I'm going to speak broadly to some of the things regarding zoning and the Uptown Small Area Plan. One of the major flaws underpinning the Small Area Plan is that it actually mischaracterizes the neighborhoods surrounding Uptown and Lake Street in particular, which are populated with 3 to 5 story buildings, apartments, oftentimes abutting single-family homes directly, and oftentimes much more dense than the current zoning would allow. Near my house, down at the south end of Carrick, there's a 4-story building with a commercial use on the basement that would not be allowed by zoning today. This is often disorderly and without balanced transitions, yet it's still a healthy, diverse, walkable, and most importantly, very desirable and valuable neighborhood. It is true that in the 8 years since adoption, the Small Area Plan hasn't kept up with the changing reality. The Uptown Core, where the Small Area Plan directs hotels, now only has 5 surface lots available, 2 of which have active development plans on them, and several other ones are very difficult to acquire or develop. Extending the areas allowing higher density outward from the established activity center along Lake, even deeper into the Uptown interiors, is a reasonable response to this reality. Pretending the Uptown Small Area Plan is a pro-development compromise ignores the many, many blocks across the city and as well as the greater Uptown area that are zoned R2B or below, with the Uptown Activity Center and Urban Village representing a very small percentage of total land dedicated to dense development. Despite all these things, I do believe the hotel actually meets the spirit and intent of the Small Area Plan and Comp Plan in many ways. It concentrates commercial activity, jobs, and guests on a commercial and transit corridor served by the best piece of bike infrastructure in the country, in the Midtown Greenway. It utilizes district parking. It steps down to the neighborhood facing homes at 60 feet tall, only 4 feet taller than zoning and the Small Area Plan recommend. And it provides generous landscape buffers between the hotel itself and the neighbors. Contrary to the appellant's claims, many people do support this hotel on this lot, as evidenced by a petition that I started, gained over 450 signatures, 85% of which were Minneapolis residents, 30% within the 55408 zip code. Many of these people were not residents of Uptown at the time of the Small Area Plan adoption, or did not feel welcome or able to participate in the creation of the Small Area Plan itself. Development scale, yep, sorry. I urge you to weigh all the things I've spoken about and support the hotel. Thank you.
We have 3 more folks who have signed in, Tom, Nazira, and then Anna. Please come up and state your name and address for the record. Is Tom Johnson here? Oh, thank you. Nazira Mohammed. And then Anna. Is there anyone who would like to speak who hasn't signed in? Okay, so we just have 2 more folks.
Hello, Nazira Mohammed. I live at 3033 Emerson. I just wanted to call in opposition of this plan. The Uptown Small Area Plan is basically a unified and collaborative effort that businesses, commercial, and residents all came together to form. And we as residents support all the local businesses and company. The residents support the businesses, the bars, restaurants, all the shops and everything on Lake Street. Lake Street is, yes, a wide corridor, but to consider just Lake Street and without the areas surrounding it is a bit narrow-minded. Lake Street does have a lot of commercial areas. It also passes through residential areas, and those residential areas are shown a bit of respect in that small area plan. And to throw away those guidelines and rules is just sort of a slap in the face in a way to the community, and especially to those who built their homes based on this plan and this contract, this unified vision that we all worked hard for. We do not oppose a hotel uptown, and I'd like to make that clear. This isn't about opposition to a hotel uptown. We very much support and would like to see a hotel uptown. What we don't like is that a huge structure butted up against our residences. It's very clear in the plan that this is not what is desired, and it's a unified vision. This isn't just based off of us. Again, a lot of other issues, including the parking issue, has not been addressed to our satisfaction. I'm sorry, we don't want doubt that Ben Graves wants to serve the community, and we don't doubt that you would provide a great service to our community, but we ask that you just respect and honor the small area plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna?
Hi, I'm Anna Mathis, 3121 DuPont Avenue South. I was not planning on speaking when I came. I just came for my support, but I oppose the hotel at this particular location. Again, not any hotel, I mean at other locations that honor the Uptown Small Area Plan. I am somebody who spent many hours, going to meetings, many meetings, on the Uptown Small Area Plan, and it was very clear to all of us residents who were working on it that it was going to mean something, and it was going to mean something to everybody. I mean, there were compromises that were made for both the businesses as well as the residents, for many, many different people, and this was the plan that came up with, and it was very clear to all of us that participated in the plan, and I've read this Uptown Small Area Plan, that it was meant to not be the tall buildings south of Lake Street, that the core was supposed to be north of Lake Street. And there are all sorts of many things that make this difficult, as well as the parking issues. I mean, I live like a block away from where this development is, and we have parking issues where I am. So I can't imagine what it's like even closer to this site and what's going to happen to it. So I just wanted to let you know that I am in opposition to the hotel at this location for the size that it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Anyone else? Final call. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. So we have 3 items on our agenda that are all related to this proposal. So taking it a bit out of order in the listed agenda, we'll now move to item number 7, which is the rezoning. Without the rezoning, the rest of the items are moot. So on item number 7, I will move to approve the rezoning. I'll see if any of my colleagues want to comment. And then I'll go ahead and speak to this rezoning, and then anyone else is very welcome to jump in. So first I want to say that hundreds of people participated in this discussion. My staff and I attended at least 3 neighborhood meetings, and the folks at the Carreg neighborhood organization did a great job of facilitating what is clearly a very emotional subject. And I think it's very fair to say that what is reflected here is also reflected in the greater community, which is that there are definitely people who do not want a hotel on this site at all. There are people who had a lot of comments about the specifics of the design. And there are a lot of people who want to see a hotel in Uptown and here specifically. So there isn't consensus in the community. And when there isn't consensus in the community, we do our best to try to meet everyone's needs. So specifically to the rezoning, I think that it is clear to me, and I think staff did a very good job of articulating in the extensive staff report, which is the bound copy in front of all of you, why our policies support the rezoning. And I think when you look at our zoning is not perfect. We are trying to regulate a lot of things through our code. We're trying to regulate use, we're trying to regulate bulk and form, and we're also trying to put policies in place that get to the specifics of people's visions for their community. The Uptown Small Area Plan talks about the Lake Street corridor as transitioning away from auto-oriented uses into more of a pedestrian scale street with mixed use development. And of the 2 zoning classifications, C2 and C3A, C3A is actually more in keeping with that vision for Lake Street that's articulated in the plan. And certainly, as people have highlighted, you can take specific elements of this 123-page plan and make the case for different conclusions. But having reviewed the plan, and again with staff's, I think, very clearly articulated analysis of this rezoning application, I've come to support the rezoning. I think it's also notable that we have had a recent policy discussion about where we should allow hotels of this size. It's certainly not reasonable to suggest that this site in Uptown should be a 20-room hotel. That simply won't happen. So what this will be, if it's not a hotel, is likely a 6-story apartment building. And so again, our code is looking at use, it's looking at bulk. So all of our decisions are made within the legal context of our plans and our zoning, but I think we also need to use common sense. And so to say this can't be a hotel, but it can be an apartment building of the same size, certainly a hotel has different impacts and uses. But again, looking at all of the evidence in front of us and all of the conversations I've had, again, with hundreds of constituents, I've come to the conclusion that the rezoning here is supportable and actually is probably better in keeping with the vision of the plan than the C2 zoning would be. So I'll see if there's any discussion. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I've given this a lot of thought. I've really struggled quite a bit with it. I tend to come out on the side of being more cautious and generally more favorable towards neighbors who have concerns about change. In this situation, I happen to agree with Councilmember Bender. I think the zoning at C2 is worse, and something worse will happen here. And I represent a lot of hotels in my ward, and I have found them to be extremely good neighbors. In fact, often better than apartment buildings. And so I think what we're seeing in the city is that people are really in favor of mixed use development and growth, and that times are changing, and we need to change with those times. I have this drama happening in my ward right now with a one-story Walgreens going in at 27th and Hennepin. And most people in this audience would say, oh my God, a one-story big box, ugly Walgreens with the drive-through is a terrible thing. And if we were a group of people generally saying it would be less intense to the neighbors next door, a one-story Walgreens would be great. A four-story building with housing and retail below would be much more intense to the neighbors next door, yet the neighbors next door would rather see that than a one-story Walgreens. So I think for the city to grow in a thoughtful way, we need to have development in places where it makes sense. And I can see how people living on Emerson don't like it. I can, and I empathize with you. But ultimately, it's not just the people living on Emerson we have to pay attention to. It's the broader neighborhood and the broader city. And I do think the rezoning here is defensible. And I would be the kind of person who would say it was not. And I would side with the neighbors without question if I felt that there was enough evidence to support that position. But in this particular situation, I do think the right thing to do is to rezone. And I will want to speak to the CUP on the height, my area of expertise in height and CUPs. But if the rezoning doesn't pass, then there's no need to discuss any of the rest of it.
Is there any further discussion on the rezoning application? Seeing none, all those in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I think it would be advisable to specifically move to adopt the staff findings on the rezoning as well.
Absolutely. So then I'll move to adopt the staff findings to support the rezoning. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. Thank you for that reminder. That brings us to the two appeals. So item number one is the appeal of the front yard setback. So this, at Planning Commission, we did go with the staff recommendation. I'm going to move to grant the appeal. And we can speak about this more under item number two, but, you know, in my view, this is really a consequence of the significant changes that were made to this project in response to the community's desire to have a shorter building. And so I think the variance is supportable based on the context of the adjacent properties and there being practical difficulties related to fitting what is now a much shorter building on the same site. So I will move approval of that variance. I'll see if there's any discussion. Seeing none, all those in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. Moving to item number two.
Madam Chair.
And direct staff to prepare findings to support the variance. All those in approval, please say aye. Aye. And any opposed? And that carries. I'll do better this number two. All right. So our final item on this particular project is item number two. This is appeal of the conditional use permit and variances. There are 4 items here: a conditional use permit to increase height from 4 stories to 6 stories, subject to conditions, a variance to increase the maximum FAR, a variance to reduce the east rear yard setback from 15 feet to 0, and a variance to reduce the minimum loading requirement from 1 large space to 0. I will move to deny those 4 appeals. Let's see if there's discussion. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. this issue of height is vexing. It's vexing in my ward, and I deal with it a lot. And I just want to make sure I support the variance on height. In a C2 and in a C3, additional height is allowed. That's what a conditional use permit means. It's allowed with conditions. It's not a height limit. And I think that there's some confusion over that. And I want to continue to put an end to the confusion over this issue. A variance means you have a higher standard. There has to be a hardship, some practical difficulty with the property. But a conditional use permit means allowed with conditions. So I don't see a scenario where we can say no to the height when a conditional use permit is all that's required. And that would have been the case in the C2 or the C3. This is not a height limit. I don't really want to speak to whether or not I think 72 feet is too tall or 56 feet is too low. What I know is that the code allows them to ask for this, and as long as there are conditions placed on it, in this particular situation, they made it lower, closer to the neighbors, it's allowed in this area, and as a result of that, I'll support it.
Okay, is there further discussion? So I will speak to these items very briefly, but I also do want to just address this issue that was raised about the parking. So there was not an appeal of the site plan review, which is, I think, where we would normally deal with this, but I do, in addition to moving denial of the applications, I want to add a condition of approval to make sure that we do deal with this concern about parking. So we have Ms. Holeen. Maybe you could give us a little detail about this issue, the background, and then I have a proposal for how to handle this so that we ensure that we do have the needed contract in place for valet parking.
Yes, Chair Bender. The applicant, when the project was prepared, was indicating that valet parking would be accommodated with spaces that were leased in the parking ramp at Calhoun Square. So the requirements for valet parking require that the valet be done by a licensed valet service to some sort of parking facility within 800 feet of the site. And they were able to demonstrate that they met that. They also provided a lot of evidence showing, time of valet transactions, how long it would take to get from the hotel to the ramp, where those routes would be, where the valet drivers would be going. So we did base our analysis off of Calhoun Square. We've now been informed that that may not be where this parking ends up, but they are working on valet locations that were also within 800 feet of the site. It's been done in the past where uses have come in with valet parking, and we just put a condition of approval on the application that the valet parking needed to be secured before we issue building permits. There actually was an approved condition of approval on the site plan review application that required that they maintain a licensed valet service for parking within 800 feet of the site. And that condition of approval was approved as part of the site plan review, and that application wasn't appealed. So that condition of approval actually stays with the application. The reason why we're comfortable doing it that way is clearly without land use applications, they're not going to enter into a lease agreement because they don't have a viable project until the land use is approved. So one thing has to come before the other, and we certainly would not issue any permits if they don't have that signed valet contract at the time they come in to construct the building. So we will continue to work with the applicant on that. We will make sure that the TDMP addresses that and that the TDMP is signed before building permits are issued, and that we maintain a signed copy of that licensed valet contract before permits are issued.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions about this piece? Then I have just summarized what you have presented, and I've emailed it to the clerk. So I will then go ahead and just make that motion. Just again, it's what we were, I think staff would do anyway, but just to make sure we're all clear. So I will move then to add as a condition of approval that the applicant shall ensure that the travel demand management plan reflects the location of valet parking and its associated vehicle circulation. The valet parking shall comply with Chapter 541 of the zoning ordinance. And the applicant shall obtain approval of the TDM plan from CPED and Public Works prior to the issuance of a building permit for the development. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for bringing this up at this late date, but at this minute, but parking has now become an issue. I'm just wondering if the applicant would be agreeable to putting the cost of the parking into the cost of the room. I'm very concerned that if you charge $24 for valet parking, people won't use it. And then they'll just park on the street right by the neighbors. And that's exactly what they want to avoid, is having that heavy impact. So can you, Madam Chair, would you allow the applicant to speak to whether or not that's possible? And this is different. It's in a neighborhood. So I don't think it would be fair to say, well, this isn't going to be a $6 charge. I'm going to guess it's probably going to be like a $24 charge. So it would be a nice concession to the neighbors if you would agree to make that part of the room charge or discount it back if you don't use it. Otherwise, we're going to be back here dealing with enforcement of parking of people who come to use the hotel.
Sure.
Thanks, Lisa Goodman. I guess we'd have to think that over a little bit. Just to give you an example, though, of the usage at a hotel versus other types of usage that could be maybe at this site, a larger scale restaurant with 150 seats or 200 seats, where you do have a lot of valet happening at one period of time. In a hotel situation, in our experience in both neighborhood hotels and in urban downtown hotels, we're seeing less than 30% people come to the hotel via their own vehicle. And so most people are coming with taxis, with Ubers. The majority of our guests will be, within the neighborhood. I don't foresee this as being as big as an issue as maybe some people perceive. We're looking at we assume we're going to have about 30 to 35 cars when we're full at 100% occupancy. And so it's something to consider. The way that people reserve hotel rooms and the way that those things, happen, it's hard for me to commit to that, today, because we'll also get people, well, I'm not parking, so can I get a discount? Or, there's going to be a lot of those kinds of, questions. And I do see the concern. There's tons of parking, believe it or not, in the neighborhood, but it's paid parking. I parked last night. I went to Cena, and I happened to drive instead of taking my bike, which I do sometimes. But I parked downstairs in the Walkway building, and there was one car in that parking lot last night. I don't perceive this as much of an issue for out-of-town travelers that are used to paying for parking if they rent a car. I guess that's my opinion at this point. We can talk further, and I'm willing to work with the neighborhood. We obviously don't want a negative impact on the neighborhood. We want a positive impact for the neighbors, and we want to be great neighbors. We're going to do everything in our best ability to make sure that we are good neighbors.
Madam Chair, I do think this is something that needs to be discussed between the neighbors and the applicant, perhaps before the final council action. I also ate at Cena last week. I valet parked. It was $9. I was completely outraged by it. And if I was not lazy and willing to walk, I for sure would have parked in the neighborhood without question. I'm just being honest. So am I the only one? It was cold, so I got paid. But I didn't actually pay. The person I was with paid, so I didn't mind. But I would have parked in the neighborhood and walked without question. So I guess I can see how the neighbors would think this would be a problem. And so even if it won't be a problem to you, I think you should try to work with them. I can see where you don't want to have it be part of the price and how do you do it online. But if people drive up to your place, then give the valet parking for free. And then you won't have to worry about who valet parks and who doesn't. I would be very annoyed if I lived on a street with R2B zoning. Ask the folks who live around Giordano's what they think of it. No one is parking with Giordano's valet. They got rid of it because no one would pay $7, and they're all parking on Humboldt right now. So I do think it's something that has to be addressed. I don't want to dictate how. This is not the role for me, but it would be good if that's something that could be taken into consideration with Councilmember Bender's motion with regard to the TDM and how the valet would work. And maybe you have some cool, new, unique way to figure it out.
We'll keep an eye. We'll keep an open mind there and come up. Look at different solutions. There does have to be a distinction, though, between there's a pretty significant distinction between you or me when I went to dinner last night versus someone traveling, coming in to do overnight. In our experience, they're very different guests. It's not the same person.
So I think we're good with that. I do appreciate this point, Councilmember Goodman, and I think, no, I actually hesitate to even mention this, but I actually think the greater problem, to your point, is that there's sort of a dysfunction in how we're managing parking in high-use areas like Uptown. So you can park on the street for free, but you have to pay a lot of money to park in the ample structured parking that very expensive to build. And so really over time, probably what we really need to do is look at our parking policies in residential neighborhoods that are right near commercial and understand how we can better manage the cost of on-street parking. So no one wants parking meters, and folks don't probably want to pay for on-street parking in front of their houses. So this will be a terribly unpopular idea. So just to add insult to injury. All right. So I also struggle with how we would add something like that as a condition of approval to a land use application. So I think what I would like to offer is that I take you at your word that you're willing to work with the neighbors, and this is a big issue for folks who live right nearby. And I'm very sympathetic to the concerns of the folks who live right on this block, to having cars driving, in the neighborhood. I actually think that would be worse again with an apartment building, but I want to make sure that we are keeping in touch over time, that this isn't the end of this conversation about parking and traffic flow in the community. Okay, so I think, so now we have a motion that is denial of the conditional use permit appeal, the appeal for the 3 variances, and then we have this additional condition of approval related to having a contract in place for the parking and it's related to the TDMP. And Mr. Wittenberg has a comment.
Chair Bender, if I could just confirm that the committee wishes to retain any conditions of approval that may have been part of these applications in the Planning Commission's approval of those applications, in addition to the condition that you read about the TDM plan.
That's correct. Excellent. And we will also, we have all of the findings we need, I think, in this, so we would be adopting the staff findings. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all of an approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I know there will be likely a lot of people transitioning out. We do have one more item left under discussion, which is the Linden Hills Rezoning Overlay District. We have Mr. Schaefer here to give a brief presentation. We did have this at Planning Commission. There is one change from Planning Commission. Commissioner Kronzer had wanted some clarification around an issue that we've had in a couple other specific situations, and I think we got a little confused at Planning Commission. We're going to fix that. So Mr. Schaefer is going to explain what happened.
Chair Bender, committee members. Yeah. I'll see if this can go too. So as you aptly put, at the Planning Commission meeting on the 8th, the Planning Commission considered 2 items as part of the total of Linden Hills rezoning study, which implements the Linden Hills Small Area Plan, which was adopted by the City Council in 2013. 2 elements were, 1, changing the primary and base zonings. This is changing the modifications to Chapter 521 of the zoning ordinance, and then alterations to Chapter 551 of the zoning ordinance, which was removing the Linden Hills pedestrian Linden Hills overlay and installing a new Linden Hills area pedestrian oriented overlay. Mouthful. At the Planning Commission meeting, there was a discussion and deliberation regarding one of the elements of the new proposed text for the pedestrian oriented overlay in Linden Hills. And that conversation revealed that the intent of what staff included in the original proposal didn't really come through, and we weren't really meeting the intent. The Planning Commission's recommendation that is before you also moved forward and didn't quite meet the intent of what staff was asking for and what the Linden Hills Small Area Plan called for. So the memo you have before you today shows a new CPED recommended alternative ordinance text that addresses this, that provides more clarity about what is our intent when it's regard to step backs or setbacks of 3 or 4 story buildings adjacent to single family and multifamily or single and 2 family districts. And I can read that text or you can read it in front of you and ask the committee to consider that as an alternate text and move forward with that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Are there any questions? So we have a motion in front of us, which I developed in coordination with Councilmember Palmisano's office. Again, Commissioner Kronzer was attempting to clarify the language, which was the intention of staff and the community and the council member's office. So that is in front of us. I will move this motion, which clarifies this issue of stepping back versus setting back. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay, and that carries. That is our final item, and we are adjourned. Thank you.